Hello, everybody. I am Andrea Durham, and welcome to the Radikal Life podcast. I am the guest host today, and we have Marina Patrice Vare, who will be telling us about her module today.
Cool.
So would you like to introduce yourself?
Thank you. Yeah. I'm Marina Patrice Vare. My pronouns are they, them, and MP. I am the co-creator of the Radikal Life Project. I also generally host this podcast. And in my professional work, in addition to that, I'm a yoga therapist and a Daring to Rest yoga nidra facilitator. And my private practice, Sweet Perfection Yoga Therapy, I primarily work with folks who are feeling disconnected, disengaged, or disembodied. And I really love to serve folks that are working through milestones and transition, folks that are healing from interpersonal trauma, and folks during their family building journeys. Specifically, I'm passionate about working with queer and trans folks during their family building journeys. That's a little bit about my professional work. For this particular project, I've created the REST module.
Okay. And would you like to tell us, A, a little bit about the REST module, but then B, about yourself and your social location?
Sure. I'll start with the first question there. So the REST module is based on the Daring to Rest phases. So Daring to Rest was created by Karen Brody, who is the person that trained me, and it unfolds in 3 parts. So rest is the first part, which is related specifically to physical rest and alleviating exhaustion in the physical body. So that's the rest phase. Then it progresses to the release phase, which is related to mental and emotional exhaustion and alleviating mental causes of stress and how they deplete us. And then the third phase is the rise phase. And this is specifically related to alleviating what Karen calls life purpose exhaustion, and which I sometimes refer to as spiritual exhaustion. So that's the Daring to Rest model, and that's how this module is created. It's each class in the module has a short teaching component, and then is followed by a yoga nidra meditation as well. So this is really a practice-based module where I encourage folks to practice the nidras, for over time, in order to really get a embodied sense of what it means to rest. And in terms of my social location, I'm queer, I'm white, I'm larger bodied, which feels important to name as a person who practices yoga, because I don't think it's necessarily what we envision when we have this idea of someone who's a yoga teacher. I am neurodiverse, I am transgender and non-binary. Another identity that has been important to me is that I am a later in life parent. And that has shaped my journey in significant ways as well. Yeah.
Okay. I've known you for a long time.
Yeah.
I think it's really important to talk about what brought you to Yoga Nidra and Daring to Rest and rest in general. Could you tell us about that?
Sure. I'm trying to think about where I want to start with that journey. So, I have been practicing yoga since high school. I first began to practice yoga asana when I was recovering from mono. And I shortly thereafter, I had been taking Iyengar style classes, and a couple of months in, I learned about restorative yoga, and I attended a restorative yoga class, and I loved it. And then, I sort of practiced asana intermittently throughout college, and I sort of came to this place in my mid-30s where there was a lot happening, and I remembered how grounding yoga had been for me, and I returned to yoga, and also the physical practice didn't serve me in quite the same way as it used to. So I had gone back to practicing restorative, and I was in a restorative class where someone taught a yoga nidra, and I was like, oh, wild, right? And and then still didn't quite like sink into the level of like, oh, I have to do that. And then when I was, struggling with my marriage and moving through divorce, I went back to practicing yoga really extensively and went to yoga school to pursue my 200-hour. And then decided to study further to become a yoga therapist, and really in that sort of therapeutic model kept returning to this place of needing to rest myself and also feeling like everyone around me could use more rest. And so in addition to my yoga therapy certification, I decided to dive deeper into practicing rest. And, you may remember in 2016, I was very sick. I ended up needing to take a long-term medical leave from my job. And at that point, I rediscovered Yoga Nidra and started practicing daily and really like carried that forward through many years of my life, right? Before I decided that I needed to get certified to be able to like share this with other folks. Yeah.
Okay.
I feel like there's a lot more I could tell you there, but that's the...
Well, I do have a couple of follow-up questions.
Yeah.
And one of the things that you mentioned is you thought that many people around you needed rest. So how do you think this can support other people?
Yeah, I think I don't know anyone who couldn't use more rest. And I know a lot of people like myself who are recovering perfectionists, maybe are not even recovering yet, maybe are still just perfectionists, that really have gotten down the like drive, do, and they're really skilled at executing in that way. And that can be a really scary place to have someone mention rest. Mm-hmm. Right? There's, I think, for me, rest was something that I considered fearful, mm-hmm. right? And a place that it took me a long time to really settle into. And there are still times where I find myself resistant to rest. Mm-hmm. And so was the question sort of like, how can rest be of service?
Well, how can Yoga Nidra and rest serve others?
Yeah. I think that it is a place to slow down. It's a place to really be able to hear and like listen to that internal voice. For me, it's a place to connect with the universe in a big way. And it also is a place of reflection. And I will say also, it's just a place of practice, right? Okay. And so I think that it is... I love this about yoga in general and all 8 limbs of yoga is that like there is no way to perfect it. Like there is no way to like win at yoga, right? Mm-hmm. And so for me, it really is a place that I return to for practice without the expectation of getting better at it, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think an invitation to a rest practice is really just an opportunity to show up and like lower your expectations in a way that I think could be of service in the just down regulating, right? Like mm-hmm. just the, just having it be a place that can be a soft place to land. Mm-hmm. And for me, it has taken me some time to be able to be like, oh, I have a soft place to land inside myself. Mm-hmm. And so it was an opportunity to cultivate that as well. And I think I will just say it can be a different way of learning and being and doing to rest. And so that journey is also, I think, a lot of the juice of what can happen with Yoga Nidra. And I guess I'll just take a moment to specifically offer what Yoga Nidra is for folks that have not practiced or heard of it before. It is a guided yogic sleep meditation. So it unfolds in phases and moves through very specific like components in order to bring you into a deep place of rest and connection.
Okay. And you talked about the juice of it.
Yeah.
Can you tell me a little bit more about the juice of it?
Yeah, I think that, So for me, it really has been a place of transformation. It's helped me to reach quiet in a way that I have not personally been successful doing with like a stillness meditation. So there are many folks, right, who can sit down and just like sit in silence. And, I have a pretty significant trauma background. And so trying to come into a meditative state from there, that was not accessible for me. And so it was really exciting to find a kind of meditation where someone guided me through. And I think that some of the juice there for me is having an experienced guide take you, right? For me, it's a container and it's holding. And to be honest, like these days I listen to my own recordings, right? So like I have been teaching, this particular kind of yoga nidra for several years. I have many recordings. And in the last several months, I've actually been using the recordings that I made for this project for my own practice. And there's something that's really lovely for me to be held by myself in this like space of rest. So for me, the juice is like what unfolds in that process of coming into rest. If there's a particular component related to daring to rest where we listen for a soul whisper and we, track those soul whispers and then use them for particular like intention setting and things over time, that I think it's just a beautiful method. And so some of that also is just the way that I have come to practice this particular like lineage of yoga nidra that has been meaningful to me as well. Yeah.
Well, I think the best advertisement that you can give for anything is that you use it yourself.
Yeah, sure.
And so, I appreciate you saying that you use your own recordings, because that's a really powerful thing. You're drinking the juice you make,
I think it's this idea of giving myself permission to rest, right? Which is a thing that I give other people so freely and easily that it does help me to hear myself say, like, here, have this gift.
And actually, that's my next follow-up question. Tell me about permission.
Oh, yeah, sure. So I think a lot of us have really received negative messages about rest over the course of our lifetimes, right? I know in my family, my father was a workaholic, really like got up early, was drive. There was a lot of narrative around the myth of meritocracy, right? The idea that like people who are doing well in the world are doing well because they're working harder than other people and they deserve what they get more than people who are not working hard in this way. And so, I think that there was, and also, I'll talk about even like my life with my mother, right? Like we were just sometimes struggling to even like get by, right? So there's also like a exhaustion that happens there when like you're just really in the like drive of like trying to like make the parts of your daily life happen, right? And so in that, like I really developed this mentality of like I'll rest when I'm dead, right? Like when you start unpacking those messages that you have, right? And so we have these messages about being a good person if you work hard, right? About being weak if you need to rest, about if, right? Like, so there's a lot of like messages there, and it took a while to like give myself permission to like put down those messages and try to seek a different narrative and ask like, well, is this the only way to think about rest? And like, what if rest is really also a form of deep repair, right? That can really help me to unpack the messages that I literally received from my parents, but also like, they received those from their parents and like, right. And they're the messages that I'm getting at school about working hard and drive and right. And so, I had to sort of recognize that I was caught up in a system of storytelling, of a narrative that was not one that I created and was not what I wanted to be generating in order to give myself permission to rest.
Yeah, and I particularly appreciate that because in the book, The Four Agreements, Don Miguel Ruiz talks about you need to be able to separate what's yours from what's out there and what's been given to you as, the model of living or who you should be. Yeah. And I also appreciate in your module, I'm forgetting the woman's name now, when she talked about her mother and the messages that she got from her mother, because her mother was a physician, and what did they call her? The White Flash, was it?
Oh, so this is my dear friend Teresa Conroy, who is a yoga therapist, and her mother was a podiatrist. And I'm trying to remember, it might have been the White Flash. It's something related to her, like, always being on the go in her doctor's
white coat.
Yes, yeah. That's a really powerful image in there, and I think that like for a lot of folks that are what I will call overachievers, right? That there is someone in your life that you can look at and say, like, this is how they were the person I modeled my life on, right? Or their values were a thing that like really were deeply ingrained in me.
Yeah, and I also appreciated it because you talked about the situation where her mother was talking to her sister or her aunt, and basically the sister said, oh, well, I'm just resting. The mother says, what are you doing today? And her sister said, well, I'm just resting today. And her mother snide, resting? She's just resting today. And it was the whole idea that there was something wrong with resting.
But I think that, there's a large cultural narrative around that, right? That like we rest when we're sick, we rest when, we're injured sometimes, right? But the idea that we might rest as a practice of rejuvenation, or as a spiritual practice, right? A practice of resistance to all sorts of, ideals, capitalist ideals, like white supremacist ideals, right? Like the idea that we might come into this as a place of generativeness, right? I think is really contra to the messages that I know I've received over my lifetime.
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned spirituality there, because the whole idea of the Sabbath or the seventh day is all about rest. Or even, in the Old Testament, where they were required to let their grounds lie fallow for a particular amount of time so that the earth could rejuvenate itself. And so that concept is in no way new, but, what I see and what I personally know is that somehow those messages get kind of toned down, and the message of doing, work all the time seems to be the thing that's really at the forefront right now. Yeah. And that actually takes me into the next question that I have for you, because in going through your module, one of the things you talk about as well as shame. And so could you tell us more about that?
Yeah, I think it is in many ways related to permission there, right? Is that we have these messages about when we're supposed to rest, right? Like when we're sick, when we're dead, when we're right, that otherwise we should be engaged in doing a lot of the time. And what happens for folks when they reach a place of burnout, right? Or when they reach a place of, illness, or they reach a place of just like spiritual breakdown from the like doing, is that there can be shame around needing to be a person who rests, right? And I think that is it's sort of like my mission to like counter that, right? To be like, it really is it is a joyful gift to be able to give yourself space to integrate things, right? And to like find your way into like your own needs and meaning, and and to like really name that, like, that going really has been for the benefit of capitalism, right? It really has been to advance a narrative where we become, idealized workers, right? And what we can produce and create for others becomes more valued than the way that we are caring for and moving through the world and caring for ourselves, right? And so I do think of rest as a form of self-care, but I also think of it as a form of family care and of community care, right? Because if I'm so depleted that like everything I do, right, diminishes my life force, there becomes a point where I don't actually have any connection, life force, anything to build with other folks. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think of as you're talking, especially about family, and I do have some questions for you
Yeah.
about that later on. But, I used to work in daycare when I was younger, and the most disturbing thing to me, especially when we're talking about living in an industrialized country and a quote unquote first world country, is I remember that we got 2 3-week-old babies. 2.
Yeah.
And both of their moms were required to go back to work 3 weeks after giving birth. And, I was a teenager at the time, but I thought, in what world does this make sense?
Like, think about how long it took you to make that person, right? Like, I feel like you need at least that long to, like, integrate the fact that now that person is outside of your body and the way that your relationship to everything has shifted. Yeah, 3 weeks is, I like, honestly, I would call that a crime.
And I certainly agree with you there. And what I remember is the fortunate thing for that daycare center is we had a couple of older women who had children of their own. Yeah. And I remember we had these big giant windows, and they would sit in rocking chairs. We also had and they would sit in the rocking chairs at the windows and rock these babies. Yeah. And I sincerely believe that those they were both girls, but I both believe they're not sociopaths today because they got that connection that they needed because their mothers had to go back to work. It wasn't even like they couldn't even make the choice to stay home with their children without losing their source of income.
And like, think about just how exhausting and depleting it is in general to be a person that works full time, right? And then layer onto that your body has had this huge transformation twice, right? Like, I just, I think that the state of paternal leave in this country is criminal.
Yeah, I really, if there's I'm championing many things, but that's one of them, because I just thought about those poor women and having to go back to work when you're so exhausted to begin with.
Yeah.
So, moving out of shame, one of the things you also mentioned was that you are a recovering perfectionist.
Yeah. I often joke that I am spending my adult life trying to become a type A minus. I think that there are a lot of carrots and rewards to being a person who expects perfection, is an overachiever, is always sort of moving on to that next thing, right? I have a lot of things I could say about perfectionism, so I want to make sure that I didn't cut off your question there.
Please. No, and that's why I left it open-ended, because I know you have a lot to say about it.
So, I think...
I'm one myself.
Yeah, right? I think this is the thing. For me, I will say it is, I think that pursuit of perfection is the single most life-stealing thing that I can say has happened over my lifetime, right? Is this belief that you can earn your worth externally, right? And that you can only do that if you do things perfectly, right? And that even when you manage to pull it off and do something that other folks perceive has been done perfectly, it creates this, I think, addiction to then what's the next thing I can achieve? What's the next thing I can do? What's the next, right? And I think that it really, we've been through many years of therapy. And one of the things that my therapist, said to me about my relationship to perfectionism was, what do you think it's doing to the people around you? Watching you have these impossible standards of yourself. What do you think it's doing to the people around you? What do you think it's communicating to them about their worth and their, right? What do you think it's doing to your relationships, trying to always achieve these unreasonable ideals? And that was a thing that I spent many years unpacking before I decided to have children, right? Was a place where I was just okay, I have to believe that I have worth, right? outside of the things that I can achieve and do, and I want to be able to give that to the people around me. Mm-hmm. And I can't do that until I've cultivated that sense in myself, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Any more, or?
I think I'll pause there. I think I could say more, but I don't know that it would add anything that hasn't already been said.
Well, I also want to kind of take a component of that.
Yeah.
And in terms of workaholism.
Yeah.
And the idea that it is one of the acceptable forms of addiction in society. Sure. Can you speak to that at all?
Sure. I mean, I think that, yeah. I mean, I think it's a place where we even treat it like it's not an addiction, right? Where there is so much reward. Mm-hmm. Right? Like if we think about like other addictions, right? There is a lot of stigma around them. Mm-hmm. And I think that is not true with workaholism because we have these ideals around being, the work ethic and being a hard worker and the myth of meritocracy, right? Mm-hmm. This idea that like you're doing well because mm-hmm. your behaviors are mm-hmm. getting you there. And I think that it is an invisible addiction in a lot of ways, right? Like people may be able to see that you are working too much, right? Mm-hmm. But very few people will say to you like, oh, that's harmful, mm-hmm. right? And I feel like the need to name that there are a lot of reasons why people work what I would call too much, right? Mm-hmm. And a lot of them are economic, yep. right? So like I don't want to diminish, mm-hmm. right, that component. Mm-hmm. But I also want to layer on top of that there are some of us mm-hmm. who derive our worth mm-hmm. from the status of our work, right? Mm-hmm. For the reach of our work, from, what we earn for mm-hmm. our work. And also that there are some of us for whom the current achievement is never enough. Mm-hmm. Right? It's like you do the thing and then, okay, what's next? And what's the next pinnacle? And what's the next promotion? What's the mm-hmm. next, right? And that like we've been trained into that, at least here where I was raised in the mm-hmm. United States, like from the beginning, mm-hmm. right? Be a good producer, be a good, mm-hmm. cog in the machine, do the mm-hmm. things well, right? And then I think they are very closely related, workaholism mm-hmm. and perfectionism, mm-hmm. because you get rewarded, mm-hmm. right? For doing the things well, mm-hmm. right? And I think that, I have a lot of sort of conflicting feelings around mm-hmm. that, because in many ways, like I have the life I have mm-hmm. because of the things that I have done, mm-hmm. right? And in some ways, I also feel really like I probably would still have an amazing life if we had like a universal basic income and like, mm-hmm. right, everyone had the ability to take care of their fundamental needs mm-hmm. before mm-hmm. Deciding what their work in the world was. Mm-hmm. And I have this, like, I think imagining of like people really being more in vocations and avocations, mm-hmm. right? Than in careers and work, because like that's what they're good at, right? Mm-hmm. I've done a lot of work over my lifetime that I was skilled at and good at, but that brought me very little like joy to do. Or that the pieces of it that brought me joy were so diminished by the other components and the bureaucracy and whatever else that was happening where I was working, that that addiction to work still like actually rarely ever brought like the high that we think of with addiction. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense? Does that square it all with your experience?
Yeah, I think it does. But the other thing that, and you're speaking to an immigrant,
yeah,
like
a
full-blown immigrant.
Yeah.
So, in immigrant communities, work is a very, very important thing. Yeah. I also think, just going back to shaming for a bit, how colonialism affected those things, because whether you were in the Caribbean where I'm from, but particularly in the United States, that the people who did the most work were shamed and called lazy.
Yes.
And I don't know if you've ever walked through a sugarcane field or been in a cotton field. They're not pleasant places.
No.
And the people who did the hardest work and the most work and produced, the means of the economic supremacy that happened with colonialism were then shamed for doing all that hard work. And God forbid, I know there was a time in the Caribbean, both among enslaved people, but then later on indenture, where once you stopped producing, if you could no longer work, there were laws that would not allow people, they would not feed you, the people you worked for, or if you were enslaved, the owners would not feed you, but there were laws that forbid other people to feed you. So you could die of starvation, and they did die of starvation. Juxtaposing it with the workaholism, where people are, in those situations, whether it's indenture or enslavement, you are forced to work.
Yes.
And then your value is you just keep on that treadmill. But then it translates into the colonialists pushing that even for themselves in a very different way, but, creating that mental paradigm of work is worth.
Yes.
And not work as in, okay, we need to do the things to survive and even to thrive, but working yourself to the point of death.
Yes.
I don't know if you know the statistic, but Monday mornings are the number one time for heart attacks in the United States.
I did not know that, but it doesn't surprise me. Like I would guess that, most people's depression, situational depression peaks on Sunday evening, right? And and that anxiety and stress of having to get up and do it again, that doesn't surprise me at all. I really appreciate the piece that you've brought in about colonialism and about how, I'll talk about it from a whiteness perspective, right? Yeah. About how, white people have really harmed and driven other bodies to exhaustion and inhumanity in a number of ways, right? And that somehow then this has also created this ideal around work being some of the ways that we are reinforcing white supremacy, right? Like even among white people, right? As a way of training people to think about their worth and other people's worth, right? And I think that it's pervasive, and I think it's not a thing that we talk about enough, right? The ways that capitalism and colonialism are like, I mean, they're interwoven, right? But they're just
married to each other and sleep in the same bed.
They're like deeply reinforcing, right? And then all of these ways that Americans don't want to talk about race, right? But it is an economic driver, and it is we've seen over hundreds of years really at this point what happens with generational wealth or doesn't happen, right? And one of the things that I think a lot about when I talk about rest, right, is also who has access to rest, who has access to leisure, right? And how do we talk about these things? And I'm still practicing this, right? I'm still learning this and unlearning this, right? How do we talk about these things in ways where everyone can go, oh, that's for me, right? And we can make rest accessible, right, across, particularly I'll talk about across like economic status, right? Because we know that there are people who don't ever have space to rest, or I won't say they don't have space to rest, because I think people make a lot of space for themselves in things that they're not granted. Like, but I think that that we have designed our economic and social systems to make sure that some people are always in the hustle and the grind, right? And that other people are benefiting from that. And I think that the turn of workaholism there is interesting, right? Because you have people that are, basically continuing to enslave economically other folks, and then are also driving themselves very hard as well. Like we have a small sort of owning class at the top, but like the vast like middle and, it are still folks that are reinforcing that for themselves in the values that they've internalized.
Well, I mean, if we look at our political situation, and I'm not talking about either side, I'm talking about the underlying things. Look at the pandemic. Look at who had to keep going to work.
Yes.
You know, look at healthcare. Look at who has it and who doesn't.
And how many people had to keep going to work to maintain their healthcare.
Right. You know, or, you know, as I mentioned earlier, it is criminal to put a child into daycare at 3 weeks. Their immune systems haven't even kicked in yet. Let's just talk about general humanity.
Sure.
You can't do that in other places. And so, yeah, I do believe we've enshrined workaholism, and we can call it many different things.
Sure.
And even the whole idea of kind of twisting it and enshrining the hard worker, but the hard worker that is still making $15 an hour, you know, in a market where housing is impossible to find if you make that. And even me growing up, you know, my parents both sometimes worked 2 jobs, and I'm the oldest, so that meant I had to do a lot of the parenting and a lot of the things. But it's
right, that you had a full-time job as well.
Yeah. And so, you know, just survival and what that means in the overall economy and in the overall space. So I really do appreciate this and appreciate looking at rest as something that we need as human beings, you know, and that as much as we want to enshrine the things that come from capitalism and, of course, colonialism, the truth of the matter is, you know, we're still the people dying at 9 o'clock on Monday morning. Both men and women, because I think that's, you know, and all of how people are gender identified, it actually doesn't matter. People are still dying.
Yeah, that there is a pervasive harm that is happening. Yeah.
But I want to switch gears just a little bit here.
Sure.
And how has yoga nidra and rest affected your identity? Can you tell us a little bit about that journey?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think that a lot of my identity was tied to my job, you know, and a lot of my worth was hung up there. And then I got sick, right? And I was away from my job for 6 months, and I wasn't sure I was going to be able to return to my work. And, you know, and a lot of things had shifted at my work right? So I think rest was the place that I struggled against, right? And that really started helping me look at the ways that I was seeking external validation, right? So I guess there's one piece there, like just sort of shaping like where I thought my value came from. So that's, I guess, one piece I'll say. And then, you know, in terms of my identity, you know, I developed this desire to build a family and to grow our family. And, you know, rest really was the seed of that, right? Like it created this space for me to think bigger, right? And to imagine a fuller life that, you know, was filled with other things. And, you know, so being a parent is a big identity for me at this point in my life. And so that would not have happened for me without rest. And I will also say, like, in my postpartum period, I have still needed what felt to me like a surprising amount of rest. I have a tremendous amount of support in my household from my partner and my mother-in-law. And so I felt like I had a lot of space and other folks to care for Harper. And I also felt like I still needed a tremendous amount of rest. And I also had a lot of guilt around that and like what it means to be a good parent and how involved you are and how, you know, so that piece. And then also, you know, in the mix of that, also really coming into my own gender affirmation journey, which I don't think would have been possible, one, when I was working myself so hard, and two, without just the space to like rest and settle and integrate and go, okay, I've had this experience of parenthood, and I don't feel like a mother, and I spent a lot of time unpacking that, and I started to study prenatal yoga, right? And then my experience in prenatal yoga was really jarring, and it made me really start unpacking like how it was making me feel with my gender identity, and So I mean, all of those things, I mean, those are all sort of identity related pieces. And I will also say that also in my postpartum period, I had an exacerbation of a chronic illness, which then actually led finally to a diagnosis where I understood what this illness is. But even that, like the identity of being a person who is not able-bodied has been really challenging for me to integrate, and is, you know, I will probably for a long time be unpacking like internalized ableism and so sort of like shifting that identity as well. Like, what if I'm not a person who ever can work full time in the way that I worked before I was pregnant? And what if I'm, you know, and my partner was always like, well, that would be great if you're not that person, right? Like, just, you know, like, well, hooray for like that your life has evolved and changed in such a way that that is, you know, not what you're seeking. But it is, yeah, I mean, I think that for me, it has helped me to relocate my worth, right? And that is still an iterative process, right? Like that shift from external validation to internal validation, you know, is happening in real time and has been happening for a while, and like will continue to need to happen. And yeah, and so just, I would say also it has brought me closer to feeling an embodied sense of wholeness, which really had eluded me for a long time. Yeah.
And that's a big thing.
It's tremendous. And I feel like it's hard to even like name it in like a sentence and like have the gravity of it like really be felt. But yeah.
Another thing that you mentioned, and that I specifically want to ask about, because I know part of your work is about fertility and particularly non-binary fertility. How did rest inform that journey and also the work of it? Because both your personal and then expanding it out.
So there are two questions in there, and I made myself a couple of notes about it, so I'm gonna like flip so that I can sort of keep it concise. So the first is really just, you know, Yoga Nidra really was a tremendous tool for me to navigate the challenges of my fertility journey. Yoga Nidra was really an anchor. It was a place of hope and faith. It was a place that I could keep returning to, right? In Yoga Nidra, we use an intention, sankalpa, and for me, it was this mantra about, it was, I'm filled with vitality and fueled by grace, right? It was the imagining of growing a life in a person, but also of being filled with this sense of like universal grace and being held in a space where I was co-creating, but where I was not like where I didn't have to be the driving force of everything, right? And so, yeah, I mean, I would just say that Yoga Nidra became a really, had a different whole layer of importance in terms of the ritual of caring for myself and, you know, my future person, right? And and finding grounding there during my fertility journey. And then, like, you know, fertility journeys are not easy, right? And so our first embryo transfer was not successful, and it was devastating. Like, I hadn't really prepared myself for the possibility that, like, once we had done all of these other things and we had created embryos, that, like, it wasn't going to just immediately work, right? And so, you know, my Yoga Nidra practice also became a place of solace, right? It was a place to literally rest from all of the narratives and things that were happening. And it was a place where I really did believe that I was co-creating. And so I still, like, I kept with this mantra, and I just really, I showed up in a space of, like, believing that I had the internal and external resources to bring this dream to fruition. But it was, you know, and I was still, like, I was working a lot. It was really, like, stressful. It was, you know, often I would, like, drive to work really early in the morning to miss traffic so I could, like, lay on the floor in my office and practice my Yoga Nidra before I sat at my desk and started my day. You know, So yeah, I mean, it wasn't just like, oh, I laid down and I rested and oh, wasn't that nice? Like, no, it was, I like squeezed it into pockets, and I really had to get very intentional about how to organize, you know, the actual like flow of where I needed to be when and how. But what I found from where we lived was that if I left like a half hour later, it took me like 45 minutes more to get to work. Right. And so I was just started being like, okay, well, how can I fit this into what else is happening? Yeah. So like, I guess I would just like integrating this like place of rest was really urgent for my fertility journey. And there was a second part to your question, and I don't recall what it was.
I'll ask that second question in a second, but because one of the things that you're bringing up and that I saw in your module was, you know, that you have to be intentional. And, you know, you can have an intention, but then if you don't actually pay attention and create the space for that, and that's what I hear you saying, that you were intentional about it, and then you gave the attention to what was needed so that you could have that space to do the rest.
Yeah, that pairing of intention and attention. Yeah, I think that's true. It was, and I think that pairing for me really was what made me believe that I was in a co-creation process. Yeah. Yeah,
and, you know, I know that that's important, and I've known you long enough, but also a little bit about the practice that it really requires you to focus your attention there. First you intended, but then you really do have to focus your attention there, as opposed, oh yeah, I'll get rest at some point, or I'll rest when I die.
No, for sure. And, you know, like, I'm still prone to overwork. I'm still prone to overcommitting. I'm still, like, it is lifetime's work, right? To, like, keep bringing myself back, you know? And for me, it really has been, I'm so grateful that I have a tool that works for me, right? That when I bring myself back over and over again, I have a way to do it.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, and then the second part of the question, I'm sorry for asking you compound questions like that, but so for others on a fertility journey, what would you say about?
Yeah, I mean, so I would say from my own experience and the folks that I know and have had the pleasure of being in relationship with, that many of them are also overachievers and like have really, they know in other areas of their life, like what to do when and how, and like they're the things that like you have gotten skillful at doing, right? And that fertility doesn't work like that. I mean, there are a lot of things that people will tell you, if you eat this, if you do that, if you take the supplement, if you remove this, right? But there is no like there is no amount of overdoing, right, that is going to help you achieve that, right? And so what I think Yoga Nidra and rest can offer is a container to explore your relationship with having a body, right? We know that not all fertility journeys are successful. So your relationship of grief as you're going through your fertility journey, whether or not you get to become a parent, right? Whether or not you get to become a parent in the way that you expected, right? That there is a lot that is happening for folks, that there is just not a very, there's no concrete, like if you do A, B, C, and D, you'll be successful, right? And so what I think rest offers is a container to hold all of that. What I particularly think that like Daring to Rest offers is we typically do it in like a 40-day cycle, right? And so it gives you space to really be with something over time and to listen to yourself over time and to see what's happening for you, and then also to figure out if what's happening for you is actually in service to what you want to be creating or not. And I think just personally, it's really hard for me to hear and figure out if I'm in service to what I want to be creating without creating a dedicated space to step away and turn within. Yeah.
And so basically what you're saying is a big part of this is also just connecting with yourself.
Yes, I think that is true. And I will also say that for me, part of why I'm passionate about working with queer and trans folks around this is because there are a lot of additional factors related to fertility and related to, in general, like going to a doctor and having to be seen in a medical facility and rarely ever being like treated correctly or like gendered correctly, or right, like just that there's a whole other layer of stressors that are happening, right? There are, you know, you're in spaces like even like prenatal yoga spaces and things, right, where people are making assumptions about like your partnership and what kind of family you have and what your identity is. And so for me, it's also creating a place of like a respite, right? And it's really offering a space to hold folks both in the rest practice, but also just in their wholeness and with someone who sees layers of your identity that are not being supported, or the other spaces are not being created specifically to hold you. Yeah.
Okay. And in addition to that, tell me about the relationship between rest and parenting.
Yeah, so I have an important memory related to my pregnancy. It was near the end of my first trimester. I was really busy at work, like it often was, right? And I worked in higher education finance, so we had a spring break coming up, right? And I was quite sick with an upper respiratory, event happening there. And I was like, I know I'm sick, but like I only have 3 more days of work, and then I have this whole week off, and I'll just spend the week resting. Like somehow that powering through that we can make up for rest on the other side, which like in my own experience has never been true. So like I don't know why still here I was doing this, but I because I'm also an asthmatic, anytime I get an upper respiratory thing, the concern is that it might move down into my lungs, and so I'm always trying to treat it early. And so I went to see my allergy and asthma doc, and my MP said to me, "Hey, I hear that you're like really resisting like stopping right now and resting, and I just like I know that like your pregnancy has been something that is hard won, right? Like something that you have really wanted and that you have, really been trying to create in your life for a long time. And it took up a lot of space to do that. And it just doesn't sort of seem like you're letting it take up the space it needs to take right now." Right. And, she was just like, if this like progresses into a larger illness and you need to take medication and a number of things, like that becomes riskier for both your health and, your pregnancy. And she was just like, you need to stop today. Like you don't need to work 3 more days before you can take a week off to rest. Like, I know how important this is to you, and I'm just reflecting that back to you. I'm reminding you. Like there was no like judgment about like morally like you should be doing that. Like it was just like, hey, I'm reflecting back to you this thing that like I know to be true for you over the course of our relationship, which is that like this pregnancy is really important. And so, I texted a doctor's note to my boss and to HR, and I turned off my phone and I put my computer away and I got in bed. Right. And, that maybe sounds like, oh, I just did these things, but like I had a lot of like judgment about myself and think like what that meant about me, right? And then I chose to believe that what it meant about me was that parenting was really important to me, right? And so I laid down, I practiced nidra, every day, and I don't know, a day or so in, I had this like really clear insight during my nidra that my job was harming me. In a way that like, I mean, probably everyone around me had seen for a long time, right? But like enough so that like when I got out of bed after my practice, I went down to talk to my partner and I was like, my job is harming me. And he was like, yeah, I know. It's clear. Like, I'm sort of been waiting for you to be in a place where you can see this, right? Because I don't know if you've had the experience of someone trying to tell you something that you're not ready to hear. Right. Yeah. Thankfully, my partner is well-bounded and just like knows like that this is And so, in the course of that conversation, like we started making plans. Like we were like, okay, like, this is not the life that I want to have while I have a young child. And it's, really within days of that, the pandemic broke out, and we ended up moving our office. Everyone from our offices moved to our home offices. And while that brought its own whole set of stressors, what it also opened up for me was the space to spend that time I used to spend commuting, resting and journaling, and like really deeply tapping into this vision of like, what does it look like on the other side of this job? Like, what does it look like to create and shape the kind of life that I want to have? And, I waited quite some time to have children, right? I was in my late 30s before I met my partner and our twins, and then in my early 40s by the time I had, our youngest child. And so it's, some of that is that I had, because of that, right? I had put a lot of things in place, right? In terms of my own care and understanding, that it really felt possible to go, okay, I have to make a huge shift, right? And, from there, when I went back from my parental leave, I ended up retiring from a 17-year career in higher education finance. And that was not an easy decision. It was not it wasn't just like, oh, I'm just going to retire. But like from here, it was an easy decision in terms of the trajectory I was on and the way that I wanted to be with my kids. My older kids, would often say to me when I was working from home, I miss you. I don't, right? Like by the time I was in my third trimester, I was working like 60 plus hours a week during my third trimester. And like my older kids would say, like, I miss seeing you. Like we were in the same home, right? And, and that was also like, that's not the kind of parent I wanted to be, and my circumstances were such that like, it's not the kind of parent I needed to be, right? Like that I had the privilege to be able to make some choices that I hadn't been making up until that point. And, I will say my partner was very wise. He already had twins. He had lived through this. And, he had said to me, like, pretty early on, like, you need to take, like, leave 2 weeks before your pregnancy, like, before your due date. Like, you really need to give yourself. And I spent that time practicing. I was practicing nidra when I went into labor, right? Like, I spent that time trying to figure out how to find my way into rest as comfortably as you can when you're so pregnant, right? And then also just like reeling in, like gathering my resources, right? Because they had been so externalized with them, many of them going to my job, that I'm so grateful that he knew that like I was going to need that time and space to like, replenish myself so that I could have the experience of giving birth to our child, because that was a big expenditure of energy, right? Like it's a real, it's a real big thing. Yeah.
And flowing from the parenting, tell me about
I just realized that I didn't talk about what it's like as a parent now.
Okay.
And so I'm going to take a minute and just also say that in order to be in a supportive relationship with my kids, right? And that takes a lot of calibrating and recalibrating. I also really need a daily rest practice in order to show up in a way where I'm resourced to be in a relationship with other people, especially people that like really you're shaping their worldview in a way that I think is different than interacting with adults, right? Like you're showing them what is important by the way that you show up. And, so often what I will do is like, I will wake up and then I will rest before I get out of bed. So I will, I'll wake up and then I will do my yoga nidra practice, and then I'll journal for a little bit. And I know for myself, I am better resourced to be in connection with my children if I do that before I get out of bed. Then often I'll end up doing it in a different way, and I'll get up and we'll walk the kids to school and I'll do a bunch of other things before I lay down to rest. And I know that I show up differently if I have fueled myself with rest before I try to interact. And it's just like it's not even a judgment about myself in terms of sometimes I literally just can't. There's just not enough time and space to do it before I get out of bed. But rest makes me a better parent, right? Okay. And I think that it helps me to feel more grounded in myself, and then less attached to the way that my children are interacting and behaving, right? Not in a sense that I'm not like shepherding and like, but like that it's not personal in the way that it can feel more personal if I haven't taken the space for myself to rest.
So basically it gives you the internal resources to parent.
Yes, I think that's true.
Is that a way of putting it? But well, hand in glove with that is, how does it look with your partner?
Yeah, I mean, I think that my partner has always been, in the time that I have known him, just much better at managing his energy and resting. And, you know, my partner is a homemaker and has been for the entire time that we have been in relationship with each other. And so I think he just really has a better sense of like how much energy it takes to run a household and what that means in terms of needing to replenish and care for himself. And, you know, I can say that over the course of creating this project, we both got very caught up in like trying to complete this project. And like we're not resting as much, and we're like, you know, he had a lot less time for his like hobby, which is, you know, I will say is recreation as opposed to rest, but it is a place for him where he like really like comes down, right? And it like we could see it on each other, right? Is it's like you just you see that like, oh, working so hard without making space to like replenish is not a sustainable way to be. But I mean, he's also, for me, just the way that he moves through the world, like he inspires me in a lot of ways, and his relationship to rest as like not being tied to worth or, you know, in any way has really helped me to like give myself permission to rest more. Yeah. I feel like there's more I could say there, but that's probably enough. I also am being mindful of how long we've been speaking too. So.
Okay. All right. Well, talk to me about it in relationship to mental health and physical health.
Yeah, I mean, I think...
Let's start with mental health. And then we'll
in terms of mental health, right, that's how I came to rest, was like literally like urgently needing to like find a way to navigate this health crisis. And I think that for me, it does really, you know... lead me to a greater sense of mood stability, to have certain like rituals and things that I do to care for myself. So like practicing my yoga nidra is one of them, like moving my body out in the world, like going for a walk and getting to the woods when I can, and making space to connect with my partner on a regular basis. Like there are a whole series of things that I use to manage my mental health, right? And this one is really for sure a core practice. And I will say that, like, I know based on the way that my mood moves, if it's been too long. So, like, ideally I practice daily, and sometimes it doesn't happen like that. Sometimes it's been, like, a couple of days or a week, and then I go, oh, I don't like the way I'm behaving, right? Like, I don't like the way I'm feeling. And so for me, it really is a core practice that helps me to maintain and manage my mood stability.
So basically, it shores up your bandwidth.
I think that's a great way to say that. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what about physically?
So
because there's a lot of ableism involved.
Yeah,
with workaholism
and I mean, I think that like we can just talk about like what it was like to be pregnant. Like I just like there was no way to not rest more. Like they're just like I just ran out of energy in a way that I had never known before. But there was like literally just a point where like things stopped. Like I was just like, okay, I'm just laying down, right? Like I just have to, like, right? And that was easier because I knew like intellectually, like, oh, I'm creating a person. Like, so I have to be resting in order to have enough energy to do this. I think really in my postpartum period and the time, particularly since I have been living with an exacerbation of this illness, I've needed more rest, and I have still a hard time like gauging when to rest before I've passed, right? Like in many ways, I think sort of knowing where the boundary is of like how much I can do before I've passed that boundary, right? Okay. But because there are a lot of things I still want to be able to do, right? One of the ways I have to manage my physical health is to rest. And so, you know, sometimes that literally means like getting in my bed and putting a pillow under my knees and like like sitting there with my laptop if there are things that feel like they really still need to be done. And sometimes it's really just like trying to figure out like what can I do to stop and turn off. So one of the things I've done in the last couple of days, and it's really just a new practice, is like there was something happened in my phone that like when they upgraded it, like the sleep thing happens where when you have it, where I have my phone on sleep, it now goes black and white at a point. And, you know, part of my neurodivergence is that I have a real like visual and spatial like specific things. So if things don't look the way I'm expecting them to, it's really jarring. And so this has actually caused me to turn off my phone. Like I have now set my phone so that it is in like, you know, sleep mode from 9 p.m. until 7 a.m. And so I am often up much later than that. But what I've found is because this is so jarring for me, I will literally turn off my phone. And so it has given me a lot more space to rest because it's like, okay, like I'm powering down. And sometimes I end up getting on my laptop and doing other things. But I've been really trying to figure out like, how can I have more space between my work and my sleep? Right. And so that has also been helpful for my physical health and my mental health, really, both of those things. Yeah.
Okay. Who are some of the influences that you have in terms of rest?
So I made a list also just so I don't like forget some folks that are really important to me.
Sure.
So, you know, I have mentioned that I'm trained in Daring to Rest with Karen Brody, and that has just the way that program unfolds over rest, release, and rise has really shaped my understanding of rest. And then I will also say I'm really influenced by the writing of Octavia Raheem and her work around rest, and then also just the activism and action of Tricia Hershey of the NAP ministry, just the way that she conceives of, communicates rest, but also takes it into community action is really shapes my understanding in big ways. She's recently published a book, Rest is Resistance, and I'm super excited as we wrap this podcast for the season. Like December is my space that I have been holding for myself to be able to really sit and have like a nourishing conversation with that book. It means a lot to me. There are also several people that have really shaped my understanding of yoga and my desire to participate in community around yoga. And so some of those folks are the folks at Accessible Yoga, both the folks that work there and, you know, serve on their board, but also the folks that they're bringing into their monthly conversations are really shaping my understanding right now. Jacoby Ballard's book, A Queer Dharma, has been really helpful for me in terms of contextualizing a lot of things. Natalia Tabilo at Yoga for All Bodies has really just, I think has a really lovely approach that has shifted my thinking about a lot of things. And then I will also name that just Tristan Katz and the work that they're doing, as well as the work that their work introduces me to that other people are doing, has been really influential. And then specifically in the way that I tie all of these things to my thinking about fertility and reproductive justice, I really feel like I need to name King Ya there, specifically King Ya's Birthing Beyond the Binary course and queer and trans reproductive loss support, but also just King Ya's, their definition of reproductive justice has really expanded my understanding and has really helped me to come better into understanding with myself in terms of intersections of identity and also then broadening my understanding to other people's intersecting identities. So those are some of the people that are influencing my thoughts about rest and how they relate to yoga and yoga therapy.
Okay. Is there anything else that you'd like to share with us?
I think I'm feeling pretty complete. I feel like I have, I feel like we've talked about like a wide range of things. I appreciate it.
Okay. Well, the final question is, what is your vision for Radical Life?
Yeah, so my vision for Radical Life, I had to write this one down because I've heard so many beautiful things, you know, from folks over the course of this podcast, right? We're like 14, 15 episodes in. So I had to sit with this and reflect on it. And I'm going to look at my notes on that one because it took me a while to get to distill it. So I will say that my vision for a radical life is one where the iterative process of learning, being, and becoming shapes me into a person of faith and action and beauty. And that where my life has me skill building in ways where I'm able to use my strengths to be of service, and to be able to do, repair and revision as needed.
Okay.
And, I think that bringing that heart, really to this creation process, right? Mm-hmm. Where people are really offering learning and coaching to help people skill build, mm-hmm. right? My hope is that this project will be in service, right? That people hear something here on the podcast that serves them, that they can take away, that they, learn something in the module that really shapes the way that they're being and serving and helps them to build their strengths in mm-hmm. ways that allow them to be of service. And then I'm just going to look and see if there was anything else that I want to say here. I think just that for me, a radical life is also a life where I feel like I'm in right relationship with the people and things around me, and where I feel well-bounded mm-hmm. and rested and in awe and grateful. And, a growing edge for me is, and where play becomes more of a core value in like where you can see it in my lived experience of my values mm-hmm. as opposed to my aspirational values. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's my vision for a radical life.
Well, thank you so much for sharing rest with us.
Well, thank you so much for your thoughtful questions. And, this is our season finale of the mm-hmm. podcast. And so also just I'm really grateful for everyone that I've had the opportunity to speak with over the course of this season, and to the folks that have been listening and viewing and allowing me into their minds and hearts, and allowing our guests to help shape their experiences. So thank you all.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for joining us. Head over to our website at radikal.life to sign up for your free Radical Life Starter Kit. Our website is radikal.life. Today's episode was hosted by Andrea Durham. The Radical Life podcast is produced by Marina Patrice Vare and edited by Cassidy Vare. Our theme music was created by MeeZy. Radical Life is a co-creation with Manjot Singh Khalsa and Radical Healing. Connect with us on social media, Radical with a K. We're on Instagram at radical_life_22 and Facebook at Radical Life. Maybe you've heard us say that our weekly podcast guest is a module leader, and you've wondered what that's all about. Radical Life, the Manual for Optimal Beingness, is a holistic, self-paced learning and coaching program for people seeking an optimized experience of being human. We've focused our program around 14 verbs: breathe, cleanse, clear, connect, create, do, intuit, meditate, move, nourish, rest, stretch, strengthen, and think. Each of these verbs makes up one module of the manual, which was created by a module leader who we believe embodies that verb. The Manual for Optimal Beingness is ideal for people who've already done some healing work with a therapist, a healer, or on their own, and who are feeling pretty well grounded and stable, but really want to grow into their next iteration of themselves. We found that most people have areas of support and skill building that they still want to cultivate. Our Connect module leader has described this as progressing from functional to fabulous. Learn more about Radical Life, the Manual for Optimal Beingness, over on our website at radical.life.